Just before we get started today, one quick thing. When you're looking at ad platforms like, Meta, Google, TikTok, you're probably making decisions on data that's missing like 20 or 30% of your actual conversions. And that's what's happening for most brands right now due to the iOS privacy changes. And the problem really isn't that your ads aren't working. The problem is that the ad platforms literally can't see a huge chunk of what's actually converting. So you're either, underspending on campaigns that are profitable or you're overspending on ones that aren't. And today's episode is actually brought to you by Little Data, and they're the ones that are actually solving this problem today. They fix this by becoming your data infrastructure between Shopify and everything else. So think about your ad platforms, think about Google Analytics, all of it. And they make sure that the conversion data actually gets to where it needs to go accurately so you can make decisions with confidence instead of guessing. And so now what I appreciate about them is that it's not another platform to learn or another dashboard to check. They actually make the tools that you're already using work properly. So, when you're spending money on ads, you're actually knowing what's working. And more than 2,000 Shopify brands right now are using Little Data as their main data foundation layer. So if you're at the stage where, incomplete data is kind of costing you some money, real money in ads, then you 100% need to go check out littledata.io. All right, let's jump into today's episode.
You're listening to E-commerce Fastlane, the podcast show to help you build, manage, grow, and scale a successful and thriving company, powered by Shopify. Listen to real conversations with partners and subject matter experts as they share proven practical strategies, platforms, and the best Shopify apps to help you accelerate your business. The time is now for you to improve efficiencies, grow revenue, profit, and lifetime customer loyalty. Please welcome your host, startup founder, and strategic advisor, Steve Hutt.
Welcome back to E-commerce Fastlane. I am your host, Steve Hutt. Now, we're still in what I'm going to call this the peak busy times right now, this kind of post-BFCM time. And I want to take a minute really to acknowledge just how massive this year's Black Friday, Cyber Monday was like for Shopify brands. I think they publicly announced that merchants generated, almost 15 or 14, over $14 billion, I believe, in sales over that weekend. It was up 27% over last year. And I'm just looking at a blog post here. Sales peaked at 5.1 million per minute on Black Friday, and more than 94,000 customers had their highest selling day ever on the platform. So it's pretty amazing. So it looks like everybody's winning. And, I believe those numbers are incredible. But one thing that I notice is that, generating these orders, I believe, is one part of the equation. I'd also argue that a lot of the heavy lifting is actually starting right now. It's because of these expectations now of these customers. They want quick delivery and they want accurate orders to ship fast, and they want to kind of keep things rolling here. And, the only way to have a great Black Friday for your brand is to make sure that those orders get out there on time. And that's one of the reasons why I have my guest on the show today. It's James Solier, and he is the Senior Vice President of Central Operations at ShipBob. We know and love ShipBob. They're the sponsor of the show quite a few times. ShipBob really has put together, and I read this blog post they put together around these data points. It's kind of like a post-mortem, like what's happened after Black Friday. I know they even had a webinar yesterday or today. And so it's interesting. They're publicly sharing about what's actually going on, some great takeaways. Brands can learn a lot about what has happened from these big bad brands that are connected to ShipBob. And no matter your size, we are, no matter your level, you're doing 50 orders a day or 5,000 a day. My hope today is that James is going to unpack some operational realities kind of behind the scenes. I'm hoping of what worked, what didn't work, what broke, and and what brands can learn from BFCM for themselves moving into the remainder of, I'd say, 50% of the revenue still can happen for businesses right now in this holiday time. So, hi James, welcome to the show.
Steve, super happy to be here. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, my pleasure. So let's talk a little bit about, I guess, the big picture right now about BFCM, because I think this year was a little bit different. I mean, there was a lot of uncertainty. I mean, think of some of the things that were on people's minds as a merchant. Tariffs was one, de minimis was one, about not clearing things under $800, and a shorter holiday window was another thing that was on people's minds. But your data according to his blog post right now, tells a completely different story. So can you kind of walk me through like what you actually saw kind of over that weekend?
Yeah, I mean, I would say from an outbound or demand-based standpoint, no signs of weakening. I mean, in addition to some of the Shopify data points out there, Adobe usually does their annual publish, and they reported about 8% growth in total revenue over Black Friday, Cyber Monday. So industry-wide, about $44.2 billion. Cyber Monday, again, close to 7. I stay in close contact with friends and other very large marketplaces that reported around 8% year-on-year order growth and about 10% growth in units. So like holistically, things are trending in the right direction. The story is absolutely merchant by merchant, and I would say the biggest winners here are absolutely brands. The thing I would say is that while these speak to averages across all volume, all orders, we had more than our fair share of standouts, and even categories going into Black Friday, Cyber Monday. A lot of the metrics you share in that blog post, speak to how much these segments peak, right? Like the more than doubling of demand that comes out of October. I will say this, compared to last year, merchants did a far better job of maintaining healthy in-stock positions going into peak. So just to address that point out loud, usually, there's a lot of brands out there that are sourcing from China that needs a long vendor lead time to get everything through the door. So to sort of support their sourcing strategies, they usually keep about 22 weeks of cover worth of inventory. And then as we go into Black Friday, Cyber Monday, it drains considerably by about half. And the inbound pipeline also tends to have this very clear line where it peaks around 2 weeks prior to Black Friday and then slows back down. I think what we've seen this year, which was really interesting in regards to how merchants were contemplating supporting demand, and again, maybe getting ahead of some of the tariff concerns that you had, was inbound has been elevated and steady since September. Our peak inbound week this year was actually 1 week later than it was prior year. So like signs of maybe some real cash optimization and deferring some of those bigger buys until just the right moment. But then on the demand side, holy smokes, doubling since October, but more to the point, comping those 7% or 8% year over year figures in aggregate, we saw apparel, toys and hobbies, beauty, and elf all grow more than 20% year over year, with some brands going as high as 40%. So like the way I would think about it is like these averages, I do a very good job of illustrating that, e-com and D2C is very healthy, but there are absolutely some brands out there that are just continuing to crush it and already at the, well into the millions of GMV and still finding their stride in growth. So we're very proud to support them and very excited to see, very strong demand coming out of these channels.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, when you talk about this kind of category performance, I really was blown away too. Just the beauty, health and wellness, apparel and stuff like that. Like those are some of the big, typically, but it's just nice to see that. That's the kind of the reality. When I was in Shopify, that was one of the going jokes was that, half of the Shopify brands on the network are in fashion. So clearly it's a massive market. But one of the things that I found interesting too was a kind of the, I'm going to call it like a geographic surprise for me when I was reading this blog post was interesting about how Canada spiked like almost 400% and Australia 250%. And like those just aren't like incremental jumps. Like, can you talk a bit about these international markets? Like what's going on here?
Absolutely. I would say that it's brands usually that started in the US finding extremely strong footholds internationally. So there were more than a few ShipBob customers that have recently expanded into our Canadian operations, again, spread between the greater Toronto area and Vancouver, as well as using ShipBob for our Australian operation, which is growing extremely rapidly. So I would say what you see there is really relationships that we've built with brands that have reached a level of growth and penetration that says, hey, from a sourcing standpoint, from an execution standpoint, from a cost of acquisition standpoint, we're ready to go into the geos, and ShipBob is just right behind them as part of that fulfillment journey, and they're finding success.
Yeah, this is amazing. So, let's talk about the technology. I'm going to call it behind the curtain, so to speak, because part of the blog post was talking about, 100% uptime, which really wasn't Shopify. On Black Friday, on Cyber Monday, they had their little hiccup there for a few hours, but it still didn't affect overall net, the business of merchants and whatnot. But 100% uptime, you had, millions of API calls, and there's some technical things here, but can you talk a bit about these numbers? I know they don't really mean much to merchants, but what does it mean when things aren't breaking? I'd love to talk about how do you maintain a network like this and can plan and forecast when these flood of orders are coming in?
Oh, that's a really great point. So I think part of it, to your point, is forecasting and part of it is infrastructure. And I'll answer that in two parts. I think from the forecasting side, this is a place where I would say no one is phenomenal, but we absolutely need to help everyone to get better. It's funny, coming from Amazon, I remember having an organization in that company that was stacked with some of the sharpest PhDs in the world. And even in those instances, it was hard to maintain, a plus or minus 10% at times, just because you never know what the sentiment of the consumer will be. It's hard to keep a pulse on what products are hot or not. So, transcribing that or passing over some of the smaller brands that we work with, I was just doing an analysis earlier this week. There was, except for food, drink, and health, there wasn't a single category where the majority of merchants weren't off forecast, either heavy or light, by more than 10 to 15%. So that's not to say that they're bad at demand planning per se. I think it just goes to show how hard that problem statement is. So the way ShipBob handles that is we're extremely proactive. We partner closely. We want to understand what growth is. These are conversations we have weekly and reinforced at the executive level and sort of quarterly business reviews. So by the time peak comes around, we've already got a pretty good sense of what we would call like a P20 scenario. Like if you were to have like a median expectation, your best peak ever and your worst peak ever, kind of what does that triangle look like? And then from there, make sure that the fleet and our technology can scale to the best peak ever for all parties. So that comes through load testing, that comes through volume signals, that comes through simulating the transactions we might have in the system and doing that multiple times between, I would say, the middle of the year and end of the year. So that, when we have certain brands come in a given building and they are double forecast, we want to celebrate that with them. That local node is absolutely ready to handle it. So, and then from a technical integration side, I sort of referenced it before, just constant stress testing of the ecosystem. This is a space that's growing a lot. Our brands are growing a lot. Some of our established brands are organically managing double-digit growth still. So we're building for this. So there's places where we're continuing to internalize certain things and certain solutions where maybe other providers would be going externally for things like label calls or order management. All that's sort of something that we're very much in the process of internalizing or pre-processing to the best extent possible. So when those big volume days come, it's almost unnoticeable on the FC floor, on the merchant dashboard, stuff like that. There's always still hiccups. And we work through them collectively. But again, and to some of the stuff we were talking about before the call, I think ShipBob has an extremely robust and, like I said, best-in-class sense of where we're going to go in terms of our tech stack. And we've been making huge strides towards that just over the last year. So I think this is a place where we're going to continue to surprise and delight, not just in terms of scalability, but in terms of functionality. I can assure you right now, it's a place where our heads have been for the most of this year.
Yeah, it's amazing. So what's this thing, and I read about the whole hub and spoke kind of like distribution strategy you have. And it's so interesting to me about zone skipping and sort centers. And can you break down exactly what this means for a merchant? Let's say you're, doing $500,000 a month and then trying to decide between maybe storing everything in one warehouse or have the warehouse or have the inventory distributed kind of like at multiple warehouses. I'm curious about this whole technology and mindset around this hub and spoke.
Oh, phenomenal. So yeah, the hub and spoke is always a means to an end. At the end of the day, anything you see in the operation is a means to an end. On the inventory placement side, I'll start with there first. The reason why a merchant might want to think through whether or not they want to be in more than one region comes down to a couple of quick things. One, can I make it a conversion driver? We're very much at the sense that the supply chain is your P&L. So if you place inventory closer to your demand sort of epicenters or centroids, depending on how sciencey you want to sound, the lower your distances are, the faster your transit times are. And at a checkout, I think it's been proven time and time again across most selection, shorter promises convert more. So that's the first thing I would think through. The second thing is that, again, with that sort of regional placement, it opens you up to a lot more carrier options in those larger cities, right? So if you look at some of the regional carriers that have come up to date and the amount of growth and evolution that's had in that space, most of the ones that I've been really happy with, or I think will play a big place in the industry, beyond Amazon and stuff like that, is really making this presence known, like the Unis and the Sears of the world. they don't always have, or they're in the process of expanding their connectivity. So the second that product is in there, in those high population centers, they're already running the routes. It gives you access to more carriers, often that are performing phenomenal services at better cost points. So not only do you have the benefit of shipping shorter distances, but you can also see the benefits of broader carrier selection. So that's another thing. So all these are good outputs. The way that ShipBob thinks about it is first just understanding the catalog and what you're trying to sell and what you convert on. If you're less speed sensitive in terms of your conversion metrics and you have a very dense catalog with lots of different order permutations, we have a few merchants that fit that bill, oftentimes in apparel, where you have size mixes or color mixes. It makes it extremely hard to identify what your head or tail SKUs are. In those instances, you probably want to consolidate your inventory in one place, and you want your fulfillment location to probably be more middle of the country so that you hit both coasts effectively. I think what we found, and I think a lot of even smaller merchants are surprised by, though, is, for most segments, your head selection, like those SKUs that generate the majority of your orders and what the components of those most popular orders are, is pretty common. And that to me signals an opportunity to really say, hey, based on what your customers buy, it's extremely predictable. It feels safe to buy into. Your demand patterns are probably pretty stable, and that becomes a great recipe for regional inventory plays. That, again, further reinforces that speed, further brings down your cost structure, and some of the risks that could come with sort of the larger inventory position tied to being in more than one place is really mitigated because you're very confident in your demand patterns. And, for those times where you still don't want to split an order because, there's that one or two tail SKU that's being added in, one of the concepts ShipBob has is a hero site. So there's always one building that has all of your selection in it. So it doesn't become a split shipment driver. It's purely a tailwind, if you will, to help with those orders containing your most fast-turning selection just coming to customers from shorter distances.
So I want to talk a little bit about social selling for a minute, because I think, TikTok shops, I think it's been massive this year, and I'm seeing more and more brands that are selling, through multiple channels, their Shopify store, their Amazon store, their TikTok shop, maybe even wholesale for that matter, who knows. But like from a fulfillment perspective, like what's different about managing inventory, maybe if you're selling on TikTok versus maybe traditional D2C site? Does anything change about like how you think about where your inventory sits, or does ShipBob have the processes in place to fully fulfill like the omni-channel experience?
Oh, that's a great point. Yeah, I think omni-channel holistically, I'm of the opinion that like demand is what ends up shaping how you think about inventory placement. Omni-channel is more how many capabilities do you have once you're in a given building. So from a ShipBob perspective, we think it absolutely helps merchants and their inbound cost structure and their inventory management holistically to be able to do that sort of kitting, prep, and freight type movements out of the same origin where we do D2C volume. And this is a strategy we've used successfully for multiple brands. I think for brands that are thinking about, to your point, that sort of channel expansion into those marketplaces, I would say first and foremost, don't think that you need to replicate or completely replace your inventory pools. That's exactly why 3PLs like ShipBob are really focused on omnichannel. There's a way to sort of test those waters without duplicating your fulfillment network. And then to the second piece, our experience thus far is that some of the marketplace challenges that we see tie more back to, I would say, integration and quality management. As to say that, like, are you comfortable that your shipper can provide the correct shipping and delivery SLAs in order to maintain the performance ratings you need to sell on platforms like TikTok or an Amazon seller fulfilled Prime platform, things like that. So I would say from a ShipBob approach, we've done a very good job of sort of ensuring that we can run B2B, D2C, the whole kit and caboodle on one inventory position in larger facilities for merchants trying to expand everywhere. So like, again, the merchants out there, don't think you need to have multiple partners and multiple inventory duplicated for a solution like this. And as a follow-on thought, just make sure that wherever you're going has their finger on the pulse of how those marketplaces are evaluating your performance. Because more often than not, the challenges that we see with small brands or brands that have come to us tie back to, hey, my legacy partner did not ship this in time, and now I'm threatened to being delisted on a platform because my delivery experience is so poor. So that's a place where we're really leading in.
I see. So then here we are, we're still in Q4 right now. And obviously BFCM is done. I mean, I wrote a blog post on this recently about the fact that let's suppose someone has $800 as kind of like their budget for the holidays. And, stats have proven it that 400 of it has already been spent on Black Friday, Cyber Monday. And so that still means that there's still 50% more business opportunity available for the remainder of Q4. What do you think about that? And then is there anything that a merchant should be doing now? Because we're in the thick of Q4 and we want to maximize what we have. It's not a one and done BFCM. It's now, what do we do with the remainder of Q4? And then how does that momentum help Q1 of next year?
It's a perfect question. We're about to enter what I would refer to as the second peak, maybe a bit more of a bump. But this is the time where people are now shopping more broadly. And to your point, just looking at our order curve last year, I think it's safe to assume that our merchants are only about 55% done with their volume between now and Christmas.
Okay.
From a cutoff standpoint, that's where I would start. Be cognizant of how long it takes your product to get to customers. That will shorten your window. Mentioning some of the inventory placement before, some of our more well-placed merchants actually have more pre-Christmas buying days just as an extension of that closer product. But I would start there, just understanding what your time window is. I think the next evaluation then, it's interesting. Peak is really about doing the same thing you always do, just executing it the best you can. So I would start with really understanding the fundamentals of your D2C platform. What's your traffic look like? What your conversion drivers are? Right. I would look at your current inventory position and start looking at what stuff that's not turning. I would refer to that as deadwood, where you can leverage that as a more effective way of getting your fixed costs down and freeing up cash in your balance sheet, just by discounting that product instead of finding some other more expensive or less beneficial to long-term value liquidation channel. So the sense I give it is that, there's still going to be a lot of people on the hunt for Christmas presents for the coming weeks. They're going to be coming into your website. Be thoughtful about how much time I'm going to be getting them to fulfill an order without having to upgrade to a more expensive shipment type, putting on our plane. And then just leverage it to the best extent you can. Make sure that you understand where you're converting. And then if there's instances where you can look at places where you're currently spending too much on storage and products that maybe aren't turning at the rate you thought they would. Now is a phenomenal time to contemplate discount adjustments or bundling or other behavior to help get that out the door, keep your balance sheet in a great position.
So what about those that are listening, maybe that are in the early stages of their business? So, they're in early startup mode, maybe a few mid-market people that are listening right now. Because I do get this question asked a lot from them brands and saying, when, should I be doing fulfillment myself, or when should I start working with a 3PL like ShipBob, for example? Because I think it's interesting, how do you start asking the right questions to figure out what are the signs that you see when people need to move from their own shipping out of their warehouse, out of their own garage, and then when do they find that it's a better approach to actually have ShipBob or or whomever they choose to be their fulfillment partner?
That's a great question. I would say the way ShipBob would approach that is, we're here to support you on day zero. Now, the type of solutions we might offer will absolutely evolve with your volume and your demand and how your business grows or how your catalog expands or how your channels change. But at the very beginning, I imagine as a new brand owner, you just want to make sure that your product has a clear market fit, your customers are jazzed about it and celebrating, and you're thinking holistically about growth. Now, the enablement of that growth is 100% your supply chain. But again, that's where, you'd think to yourself, what's an evening better spent? Packing boxes in your garage or thinking through how you're going to grow, either your addressable market or existing top line by another 50%. I would argue packing boxes might feel more therapeutic.
Yeah.
But as you think about why you're in the spot you're on, it's because you're solving a problem for a customer and you have found some unique value or perspective in what you're doing. And that's your comparative advantage. And that's where you should lean in hard. And ShipBob exists in a way so that, you have someone who really cares about what a great supply chain looks like and will hold itself accountable. But to many of the brands that started at, extremely small single building footprints with us and are now well-known household names, we expect us to take that journey with you. And as we notice your demand patterns, we're the type of organization that might reach out proactively and say, holy smokes, congratulations on the success. Maybe it's time to think about more than one building, or maybe it's time to think about international expansion. So I would err on the side of growing your revenue and relying on a company like ShipBob to make sure that there's someone that's just crushing on the fulfillment side for you. And that can be at nearly any size. And that transparency is also important too, because we do know those early stages, like you want to make sure that your customers have a seamless experience from checkout to delivery. And we're pretty transparent on that. So I think that you can make that transition without feeling any real loss of control either.
Yeah, that's amazing. So what about for the remainder, I guess, getting into 2026 then? Is there anything that the data is showing that maybe brands can think about now? Maybe, because I think a lot of people maybe aren't paying too much attention maybe to the data as much as maybe they should. I'm trying to figure out if there's any takeaways for those that, like, hey, based on this blog post, the success so far, and we're going to try to continue on with that momentum. But now it's going to now bleed into 2026. I just want to make sure that we're thinking about, you brought it up already about the global expansion opportunities that are out there. And just curious overall what ShipBob thinks about how 2026 should play out and how brands can position themselves in a successful way.
I think for 2026, it's mostly us helping think brands through like what's the best way to manage their balance sheets and continue to grow the way they need to. So again, most of the volume that we do here at ShipBob, we know originates from an inventory perspective from Asia, and a lot of that's from China. We know that the tariff picture has put cash pressure on a lot of our partners, and they're looking at strategies like FTZ, or again, as we saw this peak, really timing their inbound in a way to not really have too much of a working capital impact. I would say that we at ShipBob have spent a lot of this year thinking about that. We launched our own ShipBob co-branded lending program to help merchants out. We've launched an FTZ in the West Coast and have one ready to go in the East. So we're building, I would say, solutions to help merchants manage the kind of cash positions and pressures they've seen this year. But aside from that, again, I would expect that if we were to talk again a year from now, Steve, it would be the same thing. It would be another gangbusters year for e-com growth. Yeah. It would be a story that says the American consumer is spending, 8 to 10% more, but there are some brands out there that have just hit the nail on the head and are continuing to grow at 30+% CAGRs. And I think for them, it'll just be more of the same as how far are you penetrated now? Do you think you're ready for international expansion? Do you have the right people to talk to there? As you think about that, is it deploying inventory or is it shipping internationally using a DDP or DDU type solution? That's where I would err on the side of finding a partner that is highly transparent, that you can trust to help navigate those convos. And all you need to do is continue to do what you're doing, making your product great, finding the addressable market and bringing people's attention to it, and let an organization like ShipBob just empower you on the whole way.
So what do you say for those merchants maybe that are listening right now? They want to learn more about ShipBob, whether it being, your 3PL solution or even your WMS solution if they want to, run it out of their own warehouse. I just want to understand a little bit about how, your network could really help them scale. What do you believe some of the next steps are, the best way to explore learning more about ShipBob?
No, I think we have an extremely robust website, includes case studies, things along those lines. So by all means, that's an absolutely great place to start. It's also a great place to sort of ingest your inquiry. There's one thing to know on that end. We do a very good job of sort of reviewing those questions and queues, and people that come in through that funnel from a merchant size can be anywhere from SMB to larger mid-market. But I would absolutely suggest starting there. And then we have a phenomenal, I would say, marketing and sales team that'll understand what your problem statements are. And heck, you might even get a chance to speak with me, depending on how complicated of a solution we need to provide.
Right. Oh, I know. This is great. Well, this has been really eye-opening. I just, I thank you and the team actually for putting together this blog post. I think it really did open my mind because it's always nice to have. I think Rachel was the one that actually wrote it, but it's interesting because I think it kind of peels open the curtain, peels the onion a bit and says, hey, here's what's actually going on right now. And I'll make sure this is in the show notes so you can get full details of kind of what's happened over that weekend. And then with this blog post too, or with this guest, having you on the show right now, I think it opens our minds that, hey, there is massive opportunity opportunity still available. And, implementing some of the things and some of the successes of some of these big bad brands, the internationalization is blowing my mind. And Shopify is helping with a lot of that. I think even Shopify today even released, at least as of this recording, I guess every 6 months they release their editions. And I think the winter editions came out today. And I think you guys were doing some webinars and talking about some of the fulfillment-ish things you guys are working together on. It's so interesting. I think the opportunity is just so massive right now. So just thank you, James, for coming on the show and, being so transparent and sharing. I just wish ShipBob continued success in helping the Shopify brands continue to scale up.
Steve, thank you for having me. And yes, all power to the brands. And I also wish for their success going forward.
Absolutely. All right. Have yourself a great afternoon.
Cheers. You too.
Bye. All right. Take care.
Well, that's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank you personally for being a loyal listener of E-commerce Fastlane. It's my hope that this podcast is offering you a ton of value through growth strategies, tactics, and exclusive insider tips on the best Shopify apps and marketing platforms, all with my personal goal to help you build, manage, grow, and scale a successful and thriving company powered by Shopify. Thanks for investing some time today and listening to the show. I'm so proud and excited that you have a growth mindset and are a constant learner. I truly appreciate you and your entrepreneurial journey. Enjoy the rest of the week and keep thriving with Shopify.